What if you woke up tomorrow in a world not unlike our own, but you were no longer at the top of the food chain? Imagine you're living your life, working, raising a family, making music, but you do it all in the shadow of a creeping, existential horror. Picture looking at your neighbors and realizing they aren't entirely human. Imagine beings of immense power walking among you, not as saviors, but as corruptors. This isn't science fiction. This is the world as it was in the age of the Nephilim, a time of dark worship, where humanity lived under the constant threat of its giant neighbors, and every day was a fight for survival in a world teetering on the edge of divine annihilation. So what was it really like to live in a society ruled by celestial hybrids and their monstrous offspring? The biblical account is cryptic, but other ancient texts paint a picture that is more terrifying than you've ever been told. The story begins in one of the most mysterious passages in the entire Bible. Genesis chapter 6. It's just 4 short verses, but they describe a cataclysmic shift in history. It reads, "When man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. But who were these sons of God? And what exactly were the Nephilim? The Bible itself doesn't explicitly say, leaving a mystery that has fascinated scholars for millennia. Now, there are a few mainstream interpretations. Some respected theologians argued the sons of God were the righteous descendants of Adam's son Seth, and their sin was intermarrying with the ungodly line of Cain. Another view suggests these were powerful human kings who, drunk on their own power, took any woman they desired and built tyrannical empires. But the oldest and most dominant view, the one held in ancient Judaism and by the early church, is far more unsettling. In the Old Testament, the phrase for sons of God, Bene Elohim, almost always refers to angelic beings in God's heavenly court. According to this view, a faction of rebellious angels descended to earth, took human wives, and fathered a hybrid race. The Bible leaves their story there, tantalizingly brief. But other ancient texts, like the famous Book of Enoch, pick up the narrative and fill in the horrifying details. Now, let's be clear. The Book of Enoch is not scripture, but it was widely read and respected at the time, and it gives us a window into how ancient people understood these events. And according to Enoch, what happened next plunged the world into an age of unparalleled terror. To understand what it was like living with the Nephilim, you first have to comprehend their sheer scale. The Bible calls them mighty men, and when the Israelite spies later see their descendants, they report back in terror saying, "We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." That suggests beings of immense stature, like the post-flood giant Goliath who stood over 9 feet tall. But the Book of Enoch takes this to a terrifying extreme, claiming the Nephilim were gargantuan giants, perhaps symbolically described as thousands of feet tall, a size so immense it's meant to convey their overwhelming, unnatural power. But whether they were 9 feet tall or 1,000, for an ordinary human, the effect would be the same. You're living in a world of monsters. Imagine walking through your village as figures tower over every building, their footsteps shaking the very ground you stand on. Their physical superiority would have been absolute. They were a race of violent tyrants, and humanity was their prey. But the physical threat wasn't just about size. According to the Book of Enoch, the Nephilim had insatiable appetites. The text vividly describes how they consumed all the acquisitions of men. Picture this. These giants devour your livestock, your grain, every resource your community has struggled to cultivate. And when that wasn't enough, the horror escalated. Enoch states, "And when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind." This is a level of dread that's hard to fathom. A society where humans were no longer at the top of the food chain. The beings who walked among you, the offspring of angels and your own daughters, now saw you as a food source. You're not just small, you are food. The text claims they began sinning against all of creation, birds, beasts, reptiles, even devouring one another's flesh and drinking blood. For the average person, this meant nowhere was safe. The fields where you worked, the forest where you hunted, even your own home, all of it was a hunting ground for your giant, cannibalistic neighbors. The terror wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. According to Enochic tradition, the fallen angels, the Watchers, didn't just bring their lust. They brought a payload of destructive, forbidden knowledge that poisoned human culture from the inside out. The Book of Enoch lists exactly what they taught. One named Azazel taught men the art of war, how to forge swords and make shields. The violence that filled the earth, as Genesis describes it, now had a technological catalyst, amplifying bloodshed on an industrial scale. But it went beyond warfare. They taught humans how to make jewelry and cosmetics, not for art, but as a source of vanity and lust, amplifying the very sin that started the whole catastrophe. They also taught sorcery, incantations, and astrology. In essence, they gave humanity the tools for self-destruction and spiritual rebellion. The lines between right and wrong weren't just blurred. They were systematically erased and replaced with a new, dark order. This was all part of a supernatural war. The very existence of the Nephilim was an abomination that defiled the genetic and moral fabric of humanity. Some have even speculated that this was a deliberate demonic strategy to corrupt the human bloodline so thoroughly that the prophesied Messiah, the seed of the woman from Genesis 3:15, could never be born. And here's where the horror transforms. The Book of Enoch puts forward a chilling idea about what happened to the Nephilim after they died. Because they were a hybrid of spirit and flesh, their spirits were loosed upon the earth as demonic forces. For a person living at the time, this meant the horror didn't end when a giant fell. It merely changed form. Survival wasn't just about avoiding being eaten. It was about trying to keep your soul in a world actively engineered to steal it. The world was broken. Humanity was corrupt. The natural order was inverted, and the earth was saturated with violence. Genesis gives a heartbreaking diagnosis. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. This wasn't just a few bad actors. It was a terminal diagnosis for an entire civilization. God's judgment was as absolute as the corruption itself. In the view of texts like the Book of Enoch, the flood wasn't just a punishment. It was a necessary surgical cleansing of the planet. The genetic and spiritual pollution was so profound that only a complete reset could fix it. The world had to be washed clean. According to these traditions, the fallen angels who started it all faced their own sentence. The New Testament alludes to this, speaking of angels who abandoned their proper abode and are now kept in eternal bonds under gloomy darkness. The Book of Enoch describes archangels being commanded to bind the Watchers and cast them into total darkness to await final judgment. For the ordinary person witnessing this would have been beyond terrifying. Imagine the final days. Noah spends decades building a colossal ark on dry land, warning of a coming cataclysm. But society, lost in the culture of violence and corruption, likely mocked the old man and his impossible boat. Then, the judgment begins. It doesn't just rain. Genesis says the fountains of the great deep burst forth and the windows of heaven opened. This was a decreation of the world. As the waters rose, the giants who once terrorized everyone were now just as helpless. Their immense strength was useless against the power of God's judgment. All the forbidden knowledge, the weapons, the sorcery, none of it could save them. It was a terrifying and absolute end to an age defined by rebellion. The Great Flood was a reset button. The Nephilim were wiped out, their angelic fathers imprisoned, and the corrupt world they built was gone. And yet, the Bible drops a bombshell in the very same passage that introduces them. Genesis 6:4 states, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward." How could this be? If the flood destroyed everything, how did giants reappear? The Bible confirms they did. Hundreds of years later, when Israelite spies scout the land of Canaan, they see formidable giant clans, the Anakim, who they say come from the Nephilim. We meet them again in the stories of King Og of Bashan, whose iron bed was over 13 feet long, and of course the most famous post-flood giant, Goliath. So, where did they come from? The Bible doesn't say, which has led to a few major theories. One theory suggests a second, smaller incursion of angels happened after the flood, a repeat of the original sin, but on a more limited scale. Another, more speculative idea focuses on genetics. This theory posits that the Nephilim gene was carried through the flood on the ark itself. While Noah was blameless, some wonder if one of his son's wives might have carried a diluted genetic code, allowing the trait to re-emerge generations later. Now, this is pure conjecture with no direct textual support, but it's an attempt to solve the puzzle. A third view is that the spies in Canaan were simply exaggerating, using the legendary name Nephilim to describe the fearsome warriors they encountered, and to justify their own cowardice. Regardless of their origin, the command for Israel to utterly destroy these tribes is seen by many in this context, not as ordinary warfare, but as a final cleansing of the Holy Land from the lingering seed of that ancient rebellion. The story of David and Goliath becomes more than an underdog victory. It's the symbolic end of a long war against the monstrous offspring of the fallen Watchers. To live in the age of the Nephilim was to live in a waking nightmare. It was a world of constant physical fear, where you were hunted by beings of terrifying size and appetite. It was a society steeped in a seductive but destructive culture, where forbidden knowledge twisted human innovation toward violence and dark spirituality sought to sever any connection to God. The biblical account is sparse, but when read alongside traditions like the Book of Enoch, a horrifying picture emerges of a world so infected with evil that its only cure was total destruction. The story is a stark reminder of the consequences of violating the divine order. But ultimately, the story of the Nephilim is one of sovereignty. It's a narrative that demonstrates that no matter how powerful or monstrous the forces of evil may seem, they are never beyond the reach of divine judgment. The giants fell. The Watchers were imprisoned. The world was washed clean, It's a terrifying look at what happens when the boundaries of creation are violated, and a powerful testament to the fact that even in the face of monstrous hybrids and celestial corruption, order is ultimately restored.